Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about Agile methodologies. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how much upfront design is typically done for a project by teams that follow the Agile methodology? Additionally, what is your personal preference regarding the amount of upfront design that should be done and why? So usually in this planning stage or the design phase, I have a mantra or a saying that I try to push for, and that is that before you start working, every person involved in the project should have the same mental picture of what's going to be made. That is the only measurement I have for effective working. And so if I have very, very talented people, for example, I might do less prep work. If I have people who need a lot of guidance, I might do more prep work. And when it comes to UI work, for example, visual aids are always a good thing. I usually tell people that if it's at all possible, you should always try to make some illustration of, say, if it's a user-facing application with a UI, try to sketch it out. Even if you don't have a designer on hand, for example, still try to do it. Even if it's ugly as hell, it doesn't look good, or so forth and so forth. Just sort of swallow that part, because even having some basic things made with something like Microsoft Paint or something like that is better than having nothing, because the goal of the prep work should be for you to get a sensation of how things are going to go when you start working. And it's a lot better for you and your team if the team knows in what direction you want to head. Something that I see a lot of in many cases is, and developers do this and managers do this as well in many cases, where you make the mistake of not making sure that people actually have have the same understanding of what they're going to do, and then they start working in the wrong direction. And that's something that I tell developers all the time. It's very important for you, if you ask me at the very least, to structure your work process in such a way that you get a fairly fast feedback loop that you're doing the right things. So to give a concrete example here, some developers do this thing where they think they know what they're supposed to be doing, and then they sit down and then they work on like the whole project. They start building, and the project is like they sort of just start putting things together, right? And after a little while, they don't actually have something that is finished. I've had this issue with a coworker of mine actually not that long ago. He's a front-end developer, this one, and so he does the thing that I've actually made videos about why I suggest that you don't do this, and this is exactly why. So he starts working on this application that he's going to build. Now the problem is that what he does is that he starts working on some parts of the UI layer, and then he doesn't finish up everything really, and he starts working on the backend features and starts connecting to APIs and starts adding business logic, and unfortunately he is not fast enough to meet expectations. So now his stakeholders are starting to ask, is there some way, like, you've been working on this for quite some time, how can we check, can you give us a demo of like how it's going to work and how it's going to look and so forth? And he goes, yeah, I could, but I really have to finish this up, because he's not in a state where he can showcase how much progress he has made with the work that he has done. Like, I can see that he's made progress, but I can also see that he's probably missing quite a few things from what he's going to do. So I've tried to tell him, dude, instead of trying to build the whole thing and sort of, not create instead of trying to create the whole thing at once without any idea of how to get a faster feedback loop, try to do this, which is what I usually do. Create a UI first, without any backend calls, without any real data. You can basically mock the whole thing in the front end, and then showcase that. So whenever you finish something, like when you create the button, for example, let's say that you're working, in this case he was working on a form page, right? Create the page, set the header and so forth, and then just create a screenshot of what you did and say, hey, this is roughly what I'm thinking. and then you post that to the team and to the managers and so forth, so they sort of see what's going on. So you involve them. When you do this, is sort of what I call MVP. You don't have to have like a meeting for everything. Just make sure that there's these data points, visual data points of what direction you are heading, because what you're doing when you do that is that you're communicating that I just took a step in this direction with the code. And what's beautiful about that is that if there's a misalignment now, let's say that you didn't have any artboards, then this is really important, because nobody really knows where things are heading, right? Really, because you haven't seen anything. And if you have artboards and you have a designer or something like that, they will see what you are doing in terms of coding with the design that they have provided, and they can inject themselves into the conversation before you have been working for quite some time and then realize by the end of it that you did actually do a lot of mistakes, or you didn't really ship the thing that they wanted. This gives you a quicker feedback cycle. That's the thing that I call MVP. Some people call it for different reasons MVP, but this is how I suggest that you do it, because now you then basically just see that, oh, nobody's responding, or like people seem to be in agreement that seems to be the right direction, and then you work a little bit more and you add some new, say, a few fields, or like the form itself with a button or something like that that's going to submit the form, and then you post that and you say, yeah, this is sort of how it's going to work, this is how it's going to look, and now people can see like it's not finished, it doesn't have, say, all the API calls or submissions to the server and so forth, but visually it looks the way it's going to look in the end product. And that now means that, well, you have done these sorts of benchmark across, like you basically stopped and took, it takes like 2 seconds to take a screenshot and a few minutes at most to get some feedback on that. And by just doing that, you actually have made sure that everybody sort of aligns on that, yeah, this is the direction that we are supposed to be heading. And if there is a misalignment, they can see that before it's too late, before you're not, at launch date and things are not looking the right way, or so forth and so forth. It's the same principle that I tell people when, as a software developer, rubber ducking or talking to other developers before you commit too much to an idea that you have is a very good idea, because that gives you some early feedback on whether or not this is a good direction to go in. And that's the thing that I talk about when I say that upfront work should not be there's no blueprint for how much upfront design or so forth that you should do in Agile, because I believe that most people who don't truly understand the Agile methodology, or like how to be lean or so forth, they are usually treating this as a religious thing, where there are these very specific rituals that you have to do, because if you don't do them, things are going to fall apart. I've always seen the same thing, and this is why I say to people that nothing you do matters if you're dealing with idiots. I have a few videos where people ask, like, what is the worst thing that can happen to a product, and I say idiots, or ignorant people, incompetent people, because no ritual, no artboards, nothing that you do will fix the problem of having people who only do things without understanding why they are doing things. In other words, if you are creating artboards but nobody really takes them seriously, or if you are planning out Scrum and like doing all this prep work and it's not actually giving you anything, you're just doing it due to tradition or these weird rules that you have, then you don't truly understand whether if this thing is useful. You're not applying a tool, you're just applying a tradition to something that might not actually give you any benefit. And the idea behind these methodologies is that, as I said, if the end result is not that you all have a shared understanding of what you're going to do, and that you continuously make sure that you're all moving in the same direction, then why use Agile? That's the whole point of it. There's no point in trying to align people if you don't do it in such a way that they have the same idea of what's going to happen. So what I want you to take away from this is that I usually say that how much upfront design should be done in an Agile methodology comes down to the team itself. The goal should be, in my opinion, that every person on the team has the same idea of what's going to be shipped. That can be very difficult. It's basically the big challenge of the whole thing. That's why I tell people that MVP style is a very good way of doing it. That doesn't mean that you build like a whole project in a shitty way. It means that each person who's working on some feature understands that I have a first meeting with all of my coworkers where we sort of try to discuss either with artboards or without them. Visual aids are always a good thing, but even with visual aids, there's going to come up questions. So before you commit too much to your idea of what's going to be built, build as much as you feel is reasonable, like something that you can showcase, or very something small. Like, as I said, it can be like a screenshot or a message in an instant messaging Slack channel or something like that. Just build something. Create a data point where you check in with the team. This seems to be the right direction, and then see if somebody says something. With UI or user interfaces, it's very easy. Create the first simple thing on the page. Take a screenshot of your work, post it to the page, and start with the UI first. And then you repeat that process until you have a full-fledged UI, and then you can wire up the backend afterwards. It's the same thing for backend developers. If you're going to create an API or some type of logic or piece of functionality, try to use the same approach with your coworkers. Because if you do that, then at least in my opinion, then you are actually doing the thing Agile is supposed to be about. You're not just following some methodology which says that you should have a designer, a PO, a scrum master, you should have this person and this person. You're actually doing something that is effective. You're being effective rather than just following a methodology. Have a great day.